What's happening here right now is having an impact in the Middle East and beyond.
Israel-Iran war.
Fighting continues in the Middle East.
The U.S. and Israel's war with
Israel is launching a broad wave of strikes.
Most intense day of strikes against Iran today.
We are 11 days into this war with Iran.
Big wars grab everybody's attention fast. If you don't live under a rock, you probably know that the US and Israel has recently declared war on Iran. But what does this war in the Middle East have to do with Mexico? Well, when the US decides to make huge decisions like this, countries around the world are affected for better or for worse. Wars affect money, trade, politics, and how people move between countries. Sometimes the biggest changes happen in places that are not even part of the war. And Mexico is one of those countries. One of those countries that will feel the ripples just because it's so close to the USA. How war changes what the news talks about. News companies show stories they think people will watch the most. That's how they make money. The more views, the more revenue. War stories often take over headlines very fast. When that happens, other stories start to disappear from the newsfeed. Now, Mexico has been a big part of the US media coverage for the last couple of years now, especially in the last couple of years. And a lot of time when it comes to Mexico, the news isn't fair on how they report things. They make Mexico look like a complete war zone that lives in 100% poverty. And if you've been here, you know that's not even close to the truth. You see, what people see in the news and how it's reported can shape how people think and what they think is important. When attention moves somewhere else, people stop talking about it. Since the war started, I haven't seen people on the news or social media talk about the immigration issue and what's happening to people that are being snatched up in US streets and taken away to prison, all in the name of making the USA more safe. See, the thing is that a lot of times governments make big decisions when everybody's distracted. When the public is focused on other things somewhere else, that's when they pass the laws that wouldn't otherwise be passed. What I'm getting at is we really don't know what's going on in the world because this war is such a big story right now. And people in Mexico and the USA are affected by this in ways that we can only imagine. So it's important to notice not only what the news shows, but what it's not showing, and especially what it's not saying. Oil prices and Mexico's economy. Iran is in the part of the world where a lot of oil comes from. 20% of the world's oil runs through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a section of the Persian Gulf that is shared between Iran, UAE, and Oman. Little to no oil is passing through the strait at the moment because oil tankers are allegedly being targeted. And the captains have a right to refuse to go and sail through these sections. What we know from past wars in the Middle East is that when there's a conflict in that region, oil prices go up. They skyrocket. And as you know, oil prices pretty much affect all countries around the world. But Mexico is an oil producing country. When oil prices go up, Mexico can sometimes make more money from oil. They can produce more because there's more profit available. Even though oil companies can make more money, it doesn't mean that the normal everyday person won't be affected in a negative way. Higher oil prices can also rise gas prices and other costs like groceries. Big changes in oil markets can also change how countries trade with each other because oil and energy are a big part of the world economy. A conflict far away can change prices and how money flows in and out of countries and in between countries. Gas prices around the world have already increased and people are feeling it. And I think this is only the beginning. Supply chain and business moving to Mexico. Wars and global problems can make businesses nervous in every country. If these types of conflicts get in the way of profit, companies need to figure out how to adjust so their bottom line doesn't suffer. A lot of companies decide having their factories too far away from home during an unstable time is a big issue. So they often decide to move their production closer to home. For many companies in the United States, closer to home can mean Mexico. And Mexico's already equipped for it. There's already many US companies here that assemble their products in Mexico to sell them in the USA. So infrastructure and supply chain are already in place, which makes things much easier. This idea of US companies moving their production to Mexico is called nearshoring, which just means moving factories closer to where the product is going to be sold. This idea of nearshoring in Mexico has become a big topic over the last few years. especially since China and the US are having a big trade war. Companies like this idea. Taking manufacturing from China and putting it into Mexico means shorter shipping routes and much fewer risks for these companies. Mexico has an advantage. Its location in the world. Its location in the world makes it very important for trade. Big events like war can encourage some companies to build more things faster, which can mean big problems in one part of the world, like Iran, can create big opportunities somewhere else in the world, like Mexico. Immigration and border policy. When wars start, governments will start to talk more about border security. Leaders in the US will say they need a stronger border and tougher immigration laws during these uncertain times. In the USA, immigration has been a huge political topic forever now, and the US-Mexico border is already part of a big debate. It's been like that for a very long time now too. A war in the Middle East like this will make America focus more on who's coming into the country, and they'll try to adjust their laws to make sure the wrong people don't come in. But you see, the security companies that have contracts with the US government and the border love these times of turmoil because it means more profit for them. They can push governments to invest more into security regulations and technology, all in the name of keeping the nation safe from things like terrorism. All this will lead to new immigration rules and policies. And migrants traveling from other countries through Mexico to get to the USA will be affected by these decisions. Most likely for the worst. It's definitely not going to help them. There are already way too many homeless camps of non-Mexican nationals sitting on the Mexican side of the border right now, just waiting, because the US media has been saying for years now that the border is just wide open.
They're just going to enter the United States without fear of being turned away at all.
And these people believed it. They believed the stories that these news companies were telling, even though it wasn't true. And now their lives are in danger because they're stuck fighting for their lives in these camps. This war in the Middle East will cause security concerns, and it will change how the US handles its borders. And these people that are stuck at the border in Mexico trying to get to the USA right now, it will cause a lot more problems for them than they have right now. And Mexico will be the only one responsible for cleaning up that problem and helping out. War can change where people travel. When wars start in the world, many people start to get nervous about traveling far away from home. For some people, even visiting Europe feels too close to the Middle East. And let's not forget about Ukraine. Some travelers avoid regions that feel unsafe or that are remotely closer to these conflict zones. Instead, they look for vacation places that feel safer and closer to home. For Americans and Canadians, Mexico is one of the closest international destinations. Millions of Canadians also go to Cuba every year too, but since the USA has put a chokehold on Cuba's oil supply, Canadians aren't going to Cuba anymore.
The AP says 2 Mexican Navy ships of humanitarian aid docked in Cuba today as a U.S. blockade deepens the island's energy crisis.
So will Mexico be on these travelers' radar? Probably. Now, Mexico often becomes a popular travel option during uncertain times. It has in the past. But in recent weeks, Mexico's been on the news for being very dangerous too. 2 weeks ago, a cartel fought with the military and set vehicles on fire for roadblocks in Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta. There are a ton of people that canceled their trips to Mexico, even though not one tourist or civilian were targeted in these events. Even though that happened, this war in the Middle East might change people's minds and actually bring more tourism into Mexico. Because also, if gas prices for cars are skyrocketing, what makes you think that fuel for airplanes won't go up too? Flights are shorter to travel to Mexico for Americans and Canadians, so tickets will be cheaper. And it feels easier for most people compared to flying overseas to places like Europe. A lot of people choose nearby destinations instead of long international trips anyways. And over the next couple years, more tourists will be thinking in the same way. Mexico already receives millions of visitors from the United States every single year. And there's millions of Americans that are living here also. And if this situation in Iran strengthens the dollar more than it already is, it will make travel to Mexico even more affordable for Americans looking for a beach vacation. This shows how war thousands of miles away can influence decisions that affect Mexico's travel industry. And since Mexico's economy is heavily reliant on travel, it can have big effects on the economy too. The world is not as separate as it looks on a map. A conflict in one region can change economics, politics, and daily life somewhere else in the world. And when you start looking at the world this way, you realize how connected everything actually is. So what do you think? Do wars far away really affect countries like Mexico? Or do you think the connection is smaller than people believe, like me? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like this video, click on this one. I'm sure you'll like this one too. It's a good one. You'll enjoy it. And I appreciate you, and thanks for watching this video. See you in the next one.